setup going. Finally using a mic. See, trying, giving it 100%.
There
But
we
no, I'm
go.
excited. This will be a fun conversation.
So, yeah, Logan is the host of the Sowing Prosperity Podcast, talks a lot about regenerative agriculture, talks a lot about health. So, we're very aligned on that message. And maybe where did you start, Logan? Kind of take our audience through this journey that you've had, and where did this journey begin, and how did you get to be so passionate about regenerative agriculture and building up, a platform for truth around food and around health?
A platform for truth. Can I steal that, Tristan? Can that be my tagline, brother? I love that. Yeah, man, I'm just a country boy from Arkansas. I grew up in a small town where the number one industry was the pickle plant. So a lot of people know Atkins, Arkansas as Pickle City. And so when I was in school, the plant shut down, and just saw kind of the demise of rural community based off of the biggest employer other than the school leaving. And so that was kind of my window that I saw into community and having that negative economic impact. So fast forward, got a degree in petroleum technology, just a technical certificate. The shale was the gas shale in Arkansas was booming at that time, and there's a new program. Got that. Got into EMS because I wanted to do safety. So spent. Uh, I decided that I did not want to travel the world chasing oil and gas, so I jumped on an ambulance to figure out what I wanted to do, and so worked EMS for about 8 years, a little bit of real estate, and then my grandpa got sick, and so this is really where everything started shifting for me. But my grandparents and mom and stepdad had started gardening at their property, and people started pulling by their house and, hey, can we get stuff out of the garden? Well, you got anything for sale? And so my mom said, why don't you just do a little farm stand? Just sell what you got. It'll be a month out of the year for retirement money. And so that developed actually into a full fledged farmers market, little
Mm.
farm stand. And my grandpa had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That was a horrible ordeal. Started having some cardiac events, and then esophageal cancer after he had gotten over the non-Hodgkin's. And when the esophageal had metastasized to the liver and all that, it went downhill really really fast. And he ended up passing away. The business had kind of outgrown what my mom and grandma could do, and so I moved down to join them about an hour away from where we're from, and trucking along, working with local farmers, growing our own stuff, just trying to figure out how do we make a little business work. And then one day, I had two kids at the time. We went home, just kind of chilling, just sitting on the couch, and my 5-year-old said, "Hey, Dad, my pee's orange." I said, "What?" So he said, "Yeah, my pee's orange." So I went into the bathroom, and he had peed blood. And so I thought, oh God, I started racking your brain, like, why in the world is he peeing an off color? So, anyways, the next day we got into the emergency department, Arkansas Children's Hospital, and got to find out that he had cancer. So, kidney cancer, and through the course of a few days, it was established that he was stage 4 kidney cancer. And so I don't know how this little boy was out playing in the sprinkler one day, peeing blood that night, and now we're being told he has stage 4 cancer. So that was such a gut punch that, a lot of things with the mentality and what do we do came into play. But I just began to question absolutely everything and relentlessly diving into how am I going to save my baby. And so, like, we can get into what that means or whatever, but that's kind of the foundation for questioning and where we are.
Yeah, I mean it's a really incredibly sad story, but that seems to be sort of the theme that you see in these communities is that you have a loved one or maybe it's yourself that goes through something traumatic. I mean, I've sort of experienced that recently within my family as well. That sort of opens your eyes to how unequipped the centralized medical system is in handling complex, I mean, terminal illness, and also like just chronic health conditions. And I was talking to my mom earlier today, and it's sort of like you get to this fork in the road, and maybe we can kind of talk about this next for you. But you sort of get into that fork in the road where, like, you have two choices. You can go down that standard line, which in your case probably would end up in death for your loved ones. Or, like you said, you begin to question a lot of things that you have accepted as the way it is. And you realize that there's more to the story that we haven't been told on a high level. And I'd love to know, like, what in you was it like part of your upbringing, or was it just the way you seem like a very, very hard worker? What was it that was in you to sort of not want to give up, but look into an alternative way of thinking for your child? Because I mean, as a parent, I can only imagine like the amount of stress that would put you under. But it's easy to get lost in the fear of like, what can I do? Like, can I do anything? And then just stop there. So what kept you going, and sort of kind of bring us to like where you are today with all of this stuff?
Yeah. So there's just nothing that you love more than your kids, and it's just something that I never understood until I had kids. And for some reason, I've always been very much a contrarian problem solver. I guess that's why I'm really into the entrepreneurship. It's always solving something. You've always got something going completely wrong, and you're just trying to fix it or make it survive, you know? And so when you have something you love so much, and the most severe problem, right, that you can have is what you're facing, it was like, well, how do we fix it, right? Like and so as I started having conversations with the oncologist, and it was so no, just sit back. We got this. We're going to do chemo, radiation, surgery, and we got this. And it's just like that is absolutely an unacceptable answer to me. Like this doesn't make sense. Like why does he have cancer? You know, like why is cancer a thing? How is it working? How does it function? And so I was started figuring out answers to those questions, and that that led to the very first phase that I think most people gravitate to with cancer is diet, right? Like you start hearing uh, that food matters, right? Like food plays into this cancer situation some way, but you don't really know why. And you get so many different conflicting aspects of, so, you know, meat causes cancer. That was early on. I read the China study. It terrified me, right? So right out of the gate, the very first thing we did was I pulled him off meat, right? We're going to go plant based because I read the China study, and that's right, you know. And what I think was very beneficial about that was that we eliminated processed crap, right? Like, so I mean, I think that was the first step. I think we did good by that, but going into it, just started reading books, and so like the next book I think was Stephen Gundry's Plant Paradox. Just very, very, very eye opening as far as understanding that plants aren't what they were all, you know, cut out to be. And then the Dr. Tom Cowan, he's got a cancer and the new biology of water, was very eye opening. So those two books really kind of bookended what I was focused on and just kept going down. Another huge, huge, huge influence on me early on was Dave Asprey. And so just the biohacking and just looking into those fundamentals. So I think with kind of those three influences really set that foundation for solving and piecing together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I was just gonna say one thing. It's interesting because I actually want to ask you this too, because so um my boss had stage 4, I think it was thynoma cancer, and it was a reoccurrence, and he had already gone through chemo, gone through that whole process, had his thymus gland removed several years ago. And this was like round 2, but round 2 this time was terminal. They didn't catch it. It spread to other areas. He had like 9 tumors in his chest, crazy stuff. And so he decided to sort of leave everything similar to you guys, look into other alternatives, found that sort of uh, food approach. And I think his book that he references a lot is the metabolic approach to cancer and stuff like that. And he too also went plant based. I love your thoughts on like plant based versus like ketosis in its like effectiveness for I just kind of your experience with it and what you guys found like through treating ailment with nutrition, because I feel like they're like we'll get into a bunch of other stuff I'm sure, but it's like you get into the weeds of like you think you found a way, but there's you can see people thriving on like various different styles of eating even within the cancer community. Like my boss did really well on like a ketogenic vegan diet, but now, years after doing that, like tumors suppressed and all that stuff, he's seeing other problems because of like that way of eating. And so it's like becomes this sort of juggle effect of like, where do you start? Where do you end? And that's where it kind of goes beyond diet. But I just like love your thoughts on like that aspect of it, because I know you guys were leaning into that like plant-based paradigm for cancer specifically.
So that also goes back to Asprey. Asprey in one of his podcasts said something about insulin potentiated chemotherapy. And so when I heard that, I was like, what the crap is he talking about? You know? And so started looking into trying to understand that. And the correlation between two things was very eye-opening me. For me, is the microbiome with immunotherapy is completely dependent on what bugs are in there. And that, that's how I explain it to my 5-year-old. It's the good and bad bugs in your gut. The other was the chemotherapy in relation to ketosis. So the effectiveness of chemo in a ketogenic state or a fasting state was much more effective. Like there's study after study after study that proves this. And so I think that is a incredibly valuable point. Just had Travis Christofferson on the podcast. It's not out yet, so he's like the keto guy, right? Like cancer, he has incredible work, and so like Lander was always fasting when he got chemo. On my very limited knowledge, but I think that was probably one of the most important things that we did. I did not talk to the oncologist about doing that. But his blood sugar, because we were able to get, we did blood work before every chemo, was at 60 to 70 before chemo every time.
Yeah, and I know you've talked to Laszlo as well, right? And we know the effects of deuterium there for a low carb diet could potentially be very beneficial for treating cancer. And Gabor Chamalier talked about that. It's really fascinating to think of all the ways that you can actually treat, or there's these modalities, additional that you can do complementary to this standard treatment that can only augment the chances of recovery, and side effects become diminished. So I guess maybe with all your knowledge now, because just like Ryan and myself, I mean, the amount I've learned in the past 1 year by interviewing all these experts and people, what would you do differently, or what would you do now compared to what you did when you were going through this a couple years ago?
Yeah, so this is Tristan, super relevant, because I just had a mama come to me with a 2-year-old that just had a relapse. This was in the last about 2 hours. All right, so like this is super fresh on my mind. It was it's a baby that was 14 days old, diagnosed with cancer, went through treatments, horrible. 2 years later, pops up. Now the cancer's back. Okay, so I've been trying to process this over the last few hours. Um, so Laszlo is incredible, and I think he's probably the most right on the fundamentals of what's going on with the mitochondria with deuterium for many different reasons. But I would absolutely preface this first by saying there's a difference between preventing cancer and treating cancer. Okay, so it's not all one bucket. If I was back in that position, first thing I would do is I would absolutely include deuterium depleted water. I don't think everybody needs deuterium depleted water. I don't think that's what everybody needs. But in that case, that would be of the utmost importance. I would be on a very strict ketogenic diet with very high animal based, especially ruminant meat, and understanding the difference between the meats. Right? You've got to reframe the genetic aspect of cancer that's not the best way to describe it and treat it, and go from this mitochondrial aspect. And so I think I'm not saying that would, but the potential of using exogenous ketones would be up there, right? Like, so how do we crank this up with clean burning fuel? I would absolutely have included high dose melatonin for supplemental reasons. Now, I'm not saying that somebody without active cancer needs to take supplemental melatonin, right? But somebody that has something like cancer going on, I think the proof is there, right? So, like, Lawrence is coming on tomorrow, and so we're going to take a deep dive into that because he's very very high on this. I think there is some positives to look at, like the methylene blue. Incorporating that, again, it's another manner of addressing the electron transport chain. If we're doing deuterium, we're cleaning it up with these antioxidants. Uh, the other thing would be get them in the sun. I would have had him in the sun in the morning, just constantly, pretty much. And so, here in Arkansas, we've got such a great degree of temperatures, right? Like, it gets crazy hot and it gets pretty stinking cold. Not like y'all's cold, but it gets pretty cold. And but we just would have been in the cold, and I think, or we would have been in the cold, but we would have been in the sun. And just now that I've gone into Jack Cruz's work and understand melanin from another degree, it's something wasn't even on the radar. So would build up melanin, but it also take a deeper dive into copper. I think copper is so fundamental to the physiological aspects of human health, and it's never talked about. And it's never talked about in the quantum space, which is something that I don't fully understand the disconnect there. And I would love to get y'all's opinion on that. But I've talked to like Sarah Pugh about it, Morley Robbins. I've talked to a lot of people about it, and it's just still some sort of a disconnect. But I would have focused it back on how do we optimize the mitochondria. That would have been my sole focus, and then would have paired that with some of these alternative modalities that are working. So fenbendazole, it's a huge deal, and it works. I think that's also from the fungal component of cancer, but that would have been just kind of my focus right there.
Yeah, and that's a whole slew of great information and I mean great people to reference. I think it's really important distinction that you made in the beginning is that when you do have a diagnosis or terminal illness like this or some crazy health condition, everything is completely different. The urgency, the protocols, like this is a completely different scenario. Like you're saying, this is when you would actually consider taking melatonin or methylene blue, like in a regular manner. And we talked to Deanna Minnick, who talked about like plant-based melatonin being better, and that might be an interesting conversation for you to have as well on your podcast. But yeah, it's just a completely different scenario, and these are all it's like the pyramid, right? It's like you're saying addressing it still from the diet, the lifestyle, the sun, the light perspective, but then you really need to think about the protocols that are gonna like move the needle in the short term. So I think it makes sense, and people need to not conflate what to do when you have a chronic disease versus when you're just like feeling lethargic or chronic fatigue. And chronic fatigue does precede chronic disease,
Yep.
but still you need to think about the baseline foundation. And something that I want to get your opinion about now, and something I think about just hearing this 14 days cancer diagnosis and then 2-year olds, like why do you think this is happening? Because the way I think about it from a mitochondrial perspective is really just the inheritance of heteroplasmy and just this passing down of really poor mitochondrial genetics, and then the environmental factors, whether it be during pregnancy, whether it be during those young ages of infancy in the hospital, what have you. This to me is a huge issue, and I think we're only going to see more and more of this. But how do you think about like why was your son diagnosed with this at such an early age? Why is there a 2-year-old who is already having a relapse of cancer? Like that's inconceivable if this conversation was happening 40, 50 years ago.
Right. I think you're spot on. That's fundamentally what the problem is. But like, what are the practical things that did that, right? So the for us specifically, I can't speak to the the recent case we're talking about, but for us, I know that I didn't know anything about health, right? At all. Did when Lander's mom was pregnant, we did what they told us to. She got all the vaccines they were supposed to have. We were taking just a prenatal. So we had that going on. I had built a tiny home before they were, even cool, and did the spray foam insulation. And I feel pretty confident that those toxins from the closed cell insulation had something to do with it. Then Lander, when he was born, he spit up really bad. Did not wasn't much breastfeeding. He spit up really bad, and that formula is complete and utter trash. I don't know if you've ever read the ingredients on formula, but it is absolutely horrible. So what did they tell us to do? Give him cereal. Get rice cereal. Thicken it up so it holds down, right? And when you look at that, we start seeing all these synthetic B vitamins that are absolutely trash on top of the trash that the formula is. So if you look at like a lot of the formulas, the first ingredient is going to be some sort of a vegetable, right? It's complete junk. And so the genetic variation that I think everybody should at least be aware of, I don't think you should get all bent out of shape of it like people tend to do, is going to be the MTHFR. So this is a methylation of gene variation, which methylation controls all kinds of stuff in regards to DNA. But folic acid, in the context of that, will bind up the methylation pathways and absolutely make it not work. Okay, so the folic acid for somebody with MTHFR is absolutely toxic. It's not good for anybody, but it's even worse for somebody that has this variation, especially if it's dirty. We were pumping him full of folic acid between these supplements, right? But the rice cereal in that, he's already having to deal with these toxins from what I did on a new construction, and so had a vaccine just like we were supposed to, and he had a reaction to where his bile was completely shut off in his liver and he pooped chalk white. So I was working EMS at the time. He pooped white. It's like literally just like a white, poop. Started calling all, the doctor friends and stuff, and we're back into the pediatrician. Pediatrician surprisingly does turn it in as a vaccine reaction. Documented. This is no, if, ands, or buts. It was, DTaP, vaccine reaction. So we've got this going on. And as y'all know, the bile is so unbelievably important as far as being able to get our vitamins, our fat soluble vitamins, minerals, to be able to then use them. So if we're not, we shut down bile production. For how long? We really don't know that either. So you've got all of this going on, not a good diet, just continue living this standard American way, and then fast forward, we've got cancer. So I think it's a combination of things. I think it was all of that kind of together, and the inability to detox.
No, I totally agree. And it's funny because I have conversations with people about this sort of idea all day long, every day, that people really need to sort of go to a 50,000-foot view to understand that their problems didn't begin when symptoms started or when you got diagnosed with the cancer. Like your problems started probably a long time before this. And that's why in retrospective, like in some cases, you really should look at the full picture of like, what were you doing when you were like 1, 2, 3, 4? Like, did you have a C-section baby? Like, what was early life like? And even things like childhood trauma, like play an incredible role in like how your neural networks are formed and how you develop certain compensation patterns like within coping. And all of these things are super important. And one thing that the food thing's hilarious. I could go on it all day with like the baby formula and stuff and all the things that like I've been to multiple, you get the picture and everyone that's listening gets the picture. But one thing I'd love to ask is sort of like in that environment too, like you're going to doctors, all of these things, like I just imagine the stress load not only on you guys is so high but on the child too. How have you guys managed like just emotional stress, or how have you thought about that as a component to this bigger picture? Because I think the physical aspect is one part, but you can make it worse by the way you handle it emotionally. And I know that that's been extremely true for my own case and everyone I've personally worked with. How have you as a parent helped your child like through this instance on like an emotional level, and yourself too, because it plagues everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, Ryan, that's a big deal, buddy. So I remember sitting in the ER room, and I was actually on the phone ordering pizza from a local place, and I looked out in the hallway. You know, in those little doors, they've got this little square rectangle of glass that you can see out just partially. And I saw a whole group of people in white coats standing there. I thought, oh crap. So I said, I gotta go. So I hung up, and here they came, this whole group of doctors. And they came in, and the lead doctor came, and he said, "Hey, I got news. That's not good." I was like, okay, well, gut punch one. He said, "Have you ever felt your son's stomach?" No. And he said, "Come over here." He grabbed my hand and pushed on his abdomen. And he said, "What do you feel?" I said, "Something hard." Right. So it's just this hard mass in his belly. And he said, it's a tumor." And okay. So they go through, they say the next thing we're going to do is we're going to admit you to 4K, that's oncology floor, and we are going to start running tests and figure out what we got going on. And so they left. And so I've got my, my wife, my ex-wife, my mom, everybody is right there, And one of the nurses was a guy, and his name's Randy, and he said, "Come here." So he took me down the hall out to another room, and he said, "Let it out." He said, "Because when you get back in that room, you're going to have to be the rock for everybody and get through it." And so he hugged me. I didn't know this guy from Adam, but he was my guardian angel. He gave me a big hug. He said, "It's going to be all right. We got to go to work." And so had my little breakdown there, pulled myself together, went back, and that's just something that stuck with me right out of the gate. I've never had a bigger gut punch in my life, and to have somebody just kind of reframe you, just pull you out, reframe your mind, get it back together, and go. So from that moment on, Lander never thought he was sick. I never thought let him feel like a victim. I never thought let him feel like woe is me. Nothing. It's like everything we're going to do is to get better, to get stronger. So we got to do this, fill in the blank, just to get stronger. We got to do this to get strong and healthy. And then, I'd go to the bathroom, turn the shower on, completely break down, pull myself together, and go back there like we're just ready to fight more. And so just over and over and over. And one one thing that really stands out to me, and this was kind of accidental. Uh, a friend had a grandson that had like a costume kids party business where they would dress up and they go to these kids' birthday parties. But it was Superman, and they wanted to just do something for Lana. This was prior to the cancer diagnosis, and so they came out and did this elaborate little play to where he gave him this drink, this super drink, and then Lander beat him in arm wrestling. Okay, so he was so proud of himself that a 5-year-old beat Spider-Man in arm wrestling. So that was something that we pulled to. It's like, dude, you're so strong. You beat Spider-Man in arm wrestling, man. And so he was just so proud and adamant that he was strong, and everything was just getting better and getting stronger. So I think, the point of saying all that is mindset is crucial, and that victim mentality, even in the face of absolute just heartbreak and catastrophe, it's just, hey, what can we control, focus on, execute on that, and then do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ryan, you got to hop off here now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got to pop off early, but I just wanted to say, I look forward to listening to the rest of this in post, but I just want to say, that is such a critical component. I tell everybody, if you don't believe it's going to happen, it won't happen. And I've known people that have gone through surgeries, had a completely successful reconstruction or an aortic valve put in, and they actually died because of just the depression associated with having gone through the surgery. So mindset's imperative, and I think, yeah, it's I mean, I do this all the time. It's like the best thing you can do right away is if you get something is don't necessarily go into all the Facebook groups that are filled with despair because it'll bring you down.
Yeah.
So I'll say that and then I'll pop off, but I'll listen to the rest of it later. Tristan, you're in good hands. So the rest of it will be great.
I'm in good hands, or Logan is. I don't know, but
You're both in
yeah.
good hands. You got each other in the arms, figuratively speaking.
Well, yeah, and it's really important. I think Michael Amons posted yesterday or this week on the placebo effect should not really be discounted as the most powerful drug. And what is the placebo effect? It's kind of like, this self-will, this ability to heal, and if your body doesn't think that it can heal, it's not really going to be able to do that. And that gets into this whole like cell danger response, which I don't know if you've ever read about that, but there's we have this whole like mechanism of defense that goes way beyond the immune system. And if our body is just stuck in this negative feedback loop and we're in this hypersympathetic state, you're not going to be doing much healing. You need to get out of there, and you can do all the protocols you want, but I think if you're ultimately, like you said, kind of scared or really in a negative state, that it's going to be an uphill battle. Even you're going to be climbing Mount Everest versus climbing maybe something a little bit more realistic to overcome. And kudos to you for taking that on, because for your child, I can imagine for how he was feeling in that moment, but you really took it on to bring him to a place that's of strength and of comfort and confidence. So that's incredible. Yeah, wow. I mean, it's just like inspiring. Now, how do you think about just the way you raise your family and educating them on these topics? Obviously, you've had such a, I guess, deep involvement with health at an early age. So how do you continue to proliferate that in their mindset and really just raise them in the best environment possible, but want them to, be empowered by this knowledge that, really help them overcome such a, important obstacle?
Well, by far, parenting is the most difficult thing I've ever done, and so I don't think there's any beautiful little guidebook on to do it, especially when you're doing it in a contrarian way. Uh, it's challenging. It's challenging to be around people that don't get it, and they're eating a certain way or they're living a certain way, and the the lifestyle and the diet is very very challenging when that is so different that we do. But I think it's just be the example. Just be the example. We don't really compromise on it. They do not see me doing absolutely anything that it goes against what I tell them that we're going to do. And so I think being the example and just participating in it. So like I cook all the time. That's just what they do. They see, they help, they eat what we eat. And so rarely do we go out. Occasionally we do, but it's just got to live it and tell them why without preaching. I think that's the biggest thing because you can get shut down when you're just being harped on, right? But when you're actively participating in what it is and you understand why, then it clicks.
Yeah, that's the beauty of trying to find that fine balance between education that's enjoyable and leading by example is huge, I think. So that's just, anyone with a family, it's hard. I feel like it can be hard to reverse some things that maybe you've already, entrained or exposed them to. But still, if you set that example, your kids are like I mean, I watch my nephew all the time. He's a copycat. They're copycats. They just
They
want to
are.
do what their parents do, especially their dad. They just want to copy everything that you do. So if you're struggling to understand, how, to really raise sovereign, healthy children, it starts with you.
Yep.
Now, are you homeschooling, unschooling? How does that fit into the Duvall family picture?
Yeah. So I've got four kids. So 10 to 3. The oldest two I do homeschool. So they were with my first marriage. So I've got them homeschooled, and it's a whole nother dynamic. Between homeschooling and running businesses and doing all that fun stuff to try to make it work. But I think homeschooling might be the most eye-opening experience that I've had in how messed up our education really is. Uh, it's it's very interesting to me how much time is wasted through busy work or through forced structure to fill in the time between 8 and 3. And so the kids learn different, and they don't have to sit there and experience all of that wasted time under those artificial lights. So honestly, that was the biggest reason that I wanted to homeschool them, was to get them out of that environment, more so than any of the other common reasons that I hear.
So they were in school and then you pulled them out and started. How did their attitude, how did their behavior change once you started homeschooling? Was it significant?
Yeah, one negative is it's definitely less structured, so there's an adjustment. But Tristan, yesterday, for example, there is a one of our farming partners. She raises emu because she has alpha gal, and so they it's just big deal here in Arkansas. The alpha gal is like just popping up everywhere. But we go to this emu farm, and I print out all these lists of questions from geography to, we're naming landmarks, we're learning the counties we're in, the towns. I'm just making a conscious effort to make it as educational as possible. Learning about the emus, learning about why she's raising the emus, learning about alpha gal, the byproducts of processing emu, from the oil to the feathers to the, they make bone broth. And so on and on and on. And it's just taking even math, like trying to convert if an emu weighs 120 pounds and it only produces 30 pounds of meat, what's, figuring out percentages and just doing simple math, but based on something real. And so I think it just gives you an opportunity to learn completely different. And you know what really got my attention with when I interviewed Temple Grandin, and she just has such an incredible mind with the autism focus, and she's a PhD, and she's got all of these books that are just incredible. To just take what you're doing in life and make it into a lesson that means something. So it's just I think schooling can look way different than everybody has ingrained in their minds it should look like.
Well, it's like you got boots on the ground. Like it's the real world when you're immersing them in that. This is what a business looks like. Help me try and understand if the math checks out. Marketing. A farm stand, understanding how customer producer interactions go. Like these are all like real world examples, and you don't really get that often in school. I mean, I know in rural communities that have like the farming programs, but still, like where I went to school, there's none of that, and it's all just it's just simulated information, and a lot of it is just not really useful in the real world. So I'm really curious to see kind of how this transition period goes. I mean, with everything, even universities and colleges, like how do you think about your children's future now? Because I mean, if I had a 10-year-old, I would probably be like, well, you don't need to go to college in 8 years, probably. I mean, you can learn everything online. And I mean, look at you and I, how much we've learned in the past couple of years in terms of health, and just by talking to people, by having a podcast. Why, a 16-year-old could do the exact same things and learn there's so much available. Do we really need structured universities for everyone? Obviously, they'll have some role, but I'm curious on your take.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think I've learned so much outside of school, and I'm not bashing. I think there's great people in schools. I'm not trying to bash the whole school system by any means, but Tristan, to be able to have a question on hydrogen and to be able to email Laszlo and have him explain it is better than any high school or college science professor ever, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, and so to be able to, I don't know if you read the book Third Door. It had a huge impact on me just in reframing the way at which we access things or try to attain goals. And so, honestly, the podcast is the most selfish thing I think I've ever done in my life, and that's simply it's a reason for people to talk to me, right? And it just learning doesn't have to look like everybody thinks it does. And we have the opportunity to connect with people because of this technology, the good side of the technology, and learn and apply these things and go in the the path that feels right. Because there's a lot of stuff I don't care about learning about that I could, but I do care about the health and the agriculture and just implementing those things.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I got out of school and I was like, what are the most important things like in life? Health, which encompasses our food system, and then like wealth. So that's why I was like, well, I want to learn about these things, and I want to learn about them from, sources that are, people have their foot through the door in these the most innovative spaces are questioning authority, and they're really like pushing a frontier forward. And that's, where I ended up. It's interesting, but maybe getting back to the regenerative ag and the community piece, because that's where I feel like you have such an expertise and you are building community. It's something that I found, and I think is actually probably the most important aspect of all of this is the community, because you can be a sovereign individual, but if you're an individual, you're not going to accomplish much. And that's why I think, everything that we do and you do, this collective momentum forward is so important. So how have you found trying to educate people, try and proliferate this movement, whether that's through regenerative agriculture, whether that's through health, whether it's education on environmental toxins like glyphosate, for example? How have you like felt this reception, and what has been successful for you at a local community level in Arkansas?
So the big thing is that I've learned is you cannot make anybody do anything, and you can't get somebody to listen to you unless they care. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And so I don't think it's that we need a bigger microphone, right? Well, I don't think it's that we need to be louder, so to speak. I think that it's about we need to meet people where they are, and that's what you've got to do it in a way that there's awareness behind the message, right? Everybody can like ping on, oh wow, I know they're talking about health, right? I don't know what they're talking about in health, but I know that it's health, right? Or it's cancer, or it's farming, and then meeting people where they are. It's just like, people will come that it's a cancer diagnosis. Now they're hurting. They want to learn. They want to listen. That's when you can make a real impact, is because they want it. When in the documentary that we shot down at White Oak with Will, Will was pretty kind of down on the movement being something that's going to change the world. He said, I don't know. He said, I don't know if this is going to catch on. I don't live my life and run my business as this is going to blow up and take over the world. He said, because some people you're just never going to reach. And I said, and I don't. So to my point in that was just like, you're not going to reach anybody until it hurts, right? It hurt bad enough for me to wake up and pay attention when my son had cancer. For somebody else, it might be a concussion. For somebody else, it could be just the fatigue or an autoimmune, just whatever it is. Meet them where they are and bring it. So through the business side, what we do is simply just try to take care of people. Like I want to create an environment where people come out, they feel good, they have been treated well. We've asked them questions. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, I think, is the greatest business book, hands down, that has ever been written. And it's simply on interacting with people and being able to have a conversation and care and listen to them, right? And just provide a service. I think business is way easier than people try to make it out to on that smaller scale. But Tristan, it's just about the community comes from one thing: relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So foster the relationship.
Yeah, and so is business, like you said. It's. I mean, that's what I've realized, and I do a lot of different things now, probably too many different things. But the only reason I'm half good at any of them, I think, is just because the people I talk to, are interested to talk to me, and that's a relationship that comes from showing interest in their life, showing that you care about them, being enthusiastic in conversation, like, pumping them up when they need support, and vice versa. It's everything. And on a local level, something, here in Wyoming, every time I go out in public or I'm at the hot springs or whatever, it's just like you always, it goes a long way to just be friendly, to be, asking, hi, how are you? How's your day going? Like, how you been doing today? Great weather, like stoked about the sun. If you just carry this energy about you, which is easier when you have like your health and, you're inspired, and you have good energy levels. But even if you're not, like, that could lift up someone else's day, and then they're going to remember that. They're going to be like, maybe this crazy guy who's jumping in the river and it's 10 degrees out, maybe I should go talk to him and ask him why he does that. Because I found the same thing, man. I mean, people are not, and you realize this when you try and convince like your parents or your friends to do something. They're the last people who are like
Yeah.
going to listen to you. But eventually you just got to go back to what we were saying earlier. If you just lead by example and you live kind of like a really open, high energy life that's caring for people in the day-to-day conversation, they're eventually going to come around and be interested in what you're doing. And you can't force it upon people, because the moment you do that, you're projecting and you're like saying, I know more than you need to do this. And it just doesn't work, man. But is it a damn challenge? It is. It is.
It is. It is. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes of Maya Angelou is that people will forget what you say, people will forget what you do, but they will never forget how you make them feel. And that
Mm,
is such a beautiful lesson to live by. And to tie in what we're talking about with the relationships to the agriculture, I think too often relationships are based off of what I can get from you. Right?
yes.
It's a mining. It's the same thing with ag. If we're constantly just taking and taking and taking, eventually the system breaks down. Eventually the relationship breaks down. And so it's got to be a building. It's got to be a a net positive for everybody involved, or the relationship doesn't work. And so I think that's the other thing is the too often I see entrepreneurs that are simply just trying to make that sell. Right? I just want your sell. It's not about serving. It's not about adding value. It's about making the money so you can say whatever goal has been attained. And so it is. I think relationships and building them and strengthening them are vital.
So speaking about the regenerative agriculture space, you've interviewed probably most of the experts. You've been in this like hands-on. Do you see movement? Will Harris is saying, I don't know if it's going to catch on, but it's clearly catching on to some degree. But I asked Rob Wolf about this the other week. It's like, how successful do you think this regenerative agriculture movement has been so far, and what do you think needs to happen to really crank it up to the next level? And is this something that is ever going to be you know quote unquote scalable, and the whole country or most of the country will be practicing? Do you think that'll ever be a reality?
I think it completely dependent on the pendulum. So I think that to the degree at which it increased was equal to the degree of the problems through the pandemic that happened. I think that
Mm-hmm.
pendulum was here and it came to there. That's the only reason that it's moved to where it is now. And so I think when people are complacent, it will not improve. When things get worse and we have to find solutions, it will improve. So unfortunately, uh, I think the worse it gets, the more it will go, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's like you said, people, they needed a reason to like care about this stuff. And the
Yeah.
grocery stores were empty. What the hell do I do about my food? Maybe I should learn where my food comes from and go shake my rancher farmer's hand, which is good. Like, I think COVID's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's been the best thing probably that's happened to like society, because I think it did expose a lot of things and it made a lot of people wake up. However, is that going to continue? Is there enough momentum for this to keep going? We don't really know, but what I think about all these things is, like, if you just have alternatives, like if there's an opt out for people, that's the most important thing. And how large that alternative becomes, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters, but it needs to happen at least at some scale to give people an alternative, because if they don't, they're just going to keep going to the grocery store and buying beef. They're going to keep wearing polyester clothes, and they're going to keep, if blue light blockers and different types of lighting technology wasn't a thing, they're just going to keep doing the same exact thing because there's no option. And that's the way I think about it. You at least have to present, hey, this is an alternative that's better. Maybe it costs 10% more, but you get a much better benefit for your health, for example, and food security, anything. So that's how I think about it, but I don't really know if it's ever going to get to that level. And I don't really know if it needs to get to the level of like mass adoption. And there's been many people on the podcast is saying like, yeah, it's probably a lost cause to think that the majority of society is ever going to just be on board with our thinking. It's just not how it's going to go. And that's an unfortunate reality. But if we build kind of this like alternative system that's not reliant at all on the main system, that's still pretty damn good.
Yeah, I think that it's without getting like overly philosophical here. I think it's going to be the ones that are applying those principles that are going to survive, and their lineages are going to survive. So I think it will win out. It just is probably going to take a lot longer. But I mean, you look at a lot of like Jared Diamond's work, Collapse. He's got some incredible books about how society has changed and certain ones have disappeared or failed. It's it's going to be the ones that apply and that are strong are going to be left. The ones that aren't are going to suffer and probably not. And just look at the fertility rates of the world, and it's happening whether people want to admit it or not.
It's almost like a natural balancing mechanism, isn't it? I mean, like you're saying with the fertility, and I've talked about this at length, and eventually the only people who are going to be able to have children are going to be us. Like it's going to be people who are extremely deliberate about their health, and that might sound a bit cynical, but I mean, it's literally the truth. And yeah, that's why I think these next 2-3 generations are going to be this just interesting transition period, but we're going to, people look back and we're going to be the ones that really, spearheaded this. And that's what's so cool and important about what we do.
I think I appreciate the effort because I know what it takes to put things out there, and like I just have so much respect for you and Ryan and Max Goldhain and Zaid. I think y'all really come to mind in that we're relatively close in age. We're relatively equally passionate about the same things, and just putting it out there and pushing it on different platforms. I think that's another thing that's super cool. Like I just got X or Twitter this year, or like at the end of last. Like I'm brand new to it. But we got the YouTube, we got Facebook, we've got so many means, podcasts to get the message out. And I just think it goes back to that relationship piece and the network I was talking about. The tighter we can get and to serve and collaborate, and like you understand the electrical aspects more than I ever will already. And so you've been such an invaluable resource for me to learn. And Max comes at the agriculture from a completely different edge. It's beautiful, and I love when the three of us get to interview the same person because we all come from a different angle and we get to learn more based off of the responses in that conversation. So I think the network in that community is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, you remind me a lot of like Brett and Harry from the Meat Mafia, because you don't look at any of this as like a competition. You're like, oh, I just talked to like Dr. Cowan, Tristan, like you need to go talk to him. Like you'll have an incredible and that's really what's so important about this is like, yeah, it's not a competition at all. It's really, we all have different angles, we have different audiences, different platforms, and there couldn't be enough of this information out there. I mean, like,
Yeah.
how many Jack Cruz interviews are there? And there's so many good ones, and they're all different, and you all you learn something new every time because he says it. He's just pulling stuff out of his brain that you don't even know when you're going to get a little Easter egg, and it depends on the person interviewing him. And that goes with everybody, with Laszlo, with Stephanie Seneff, and it's just fun to think about it in that way. But what, maybe just a fun recap, what have been your favorite podcast episodes, and the ones where you really like learned the most, maybe ones that were unexpectedly eye-opening or really change your entire frame of reference on a certain topic?
A roundabout way of answering your question, Tristan, it is the combination of Jack Cruz, Morley Robbins, and Laszlo Boris. When you put the three of them, their messages together, they bring up these little different perspectives. But in my opinion, it makes so much sense, and it's so more complementary than I think any of the three would ever, admit. And I think it's just absolutely incredible. I think they are three absolutely brilliant men that have figured out things that mainstream is not willing or ready to even embrace, but they all go together. And you think about back to I was talking to you before I did the interview with Dr. Cruz, and I was like, dude, I'm not ready. Like, I know I'm not ready to have this conversation, but we're going to do it anyways. You you just have to try to learn and piece it together. But there's that light water magnetism is spot on. But that honestly, in my opinion and my experience, Tristan, is no different than what Laszlo and Morley are saying either. So I think to answer your question, those three together are so incredible in how those messages fit.
Yeah, it really, and what I like about, you and Max is you guys do take a holistic approach to everything, because it's like, I think there's a danger in the health space when people get, they get very niche in their platform and their speech, and people just need to understand that, like, that's because that's what they know the most about. Like, I talk about EMFs because that's like what I know the most about, but I still always try and say, like, it's everything in our environment. It's our light, EMFs, toxins, food, everything. It's all encompassing. And when you talk to experts from each realm, yeah, some things may be more important than others in slight priority, but they all matter. And we live in this toxic soup world, and that's, going back to the beginning of this conversation, like, that's why we're seeing these crazy terminal or chronic diseases at young ages, I think. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate the holistic lens and being able to communicate that to an audience tremendously.
I mean, there's so many good people. I think way too often we get in this super divisive mode through social media where we're fighting and everybody's pissed off at everybody else if they disagree or whatever. It's like, man, life is way too short. Let's just figure out what's actually working and cleave off if it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. So I just think we're such a polarized world. And it doesn't have to be that way. And again, it goes back to that network, that community I was saying. Like, I don't, man. I just can't remember any time that I have seen you or Max attack anybody. Right?
I
Like,
think
you can disagree.
yeah, maybe like once I've kind of called out a couple of people in the past month, because I don't like seeing absolute statements online. I don't like saying, like, fasting is bad, like cold plunging is bad, like PUFAs are bad. To me, it's all about context, and none of those things are inherently bad. So it's not really attacking people. It's more so I just want the truth to be able to come forward. So if you just deny, it's like anything, red meat is bad, or like whatever is bad. You can't just like make these statements. Like, obviously, if something is purely toxic, like glyphosate, yes, this is a carcinogen. This is a different story.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
there's too much. There's too many very like statements like that people make, and again, it's the same thing. It's like diet doesn't matter or light doesn't matter. It all matters. It's
All
all about
matters.
context, and that's just like how it comes down to everything. It's like we're all like in unique situations. Like, who knows what was like the number one cause of your son's diagnosis? It doesn't matter now, but what
Mhm.
matters is that you got through that, and you have such a knowledge base now to overcome that. And yeah, I mean, imagine it's like me with my concussion. It's like, if that didn't happen, my life I might still be drinking on the weekends and working like an average 9 to 5. Like, who knows?
Absolutely. There's just there's so much to be excited for. I have so much hope, especially the more I've got to know you and the others. It's just exciting. It's just I feel like the kids have hope for their future. Whereas honestly, brother, I didn't. You know, even just 5 years ago.
Yeah, I didn't even know what was going on. I was so like blinded by just being an idiot college student. But what do you think needs to happen? Like, what do we need to do in this space to reach a broader audience, to impact people deeper? I like to think we just need to keep doing what we're doing. But I really, really want to work towards a place of like more in-person, localized events. And that's why I love what you're doing. You know, you're in Bluffton, you're making documentary, like showcasing. I mean, that's relatively in your region. I would love to connect with more people on like an individual basis, but it's a challenge. So I'm curious what your take is on how we can grow this together.
Uh, I think the number one thing we can do is to foster entrepreneurship in the space. I think that
Mm,
that is the best way to reach people is by serving them, by providing a solution for whatever their problem is. And so, if we can bring, and that's a huge reason why I bring in so many farmers to the podcast, and then turn around and we're talking about something with quantum biology, right? We're bringing this together because those farmers need to be aware of this other side of it, right? Like they do, and in all of us, and that's why I try to get like carnivores to understand regenerative agriculture and bring that together because it's if the carnivore movement only supported regenerative ag, what would happen?
well, I mean, it would skyrocket in popularity, right?
So if we honed in on the things that
Yeah.
have that biggest impact, right? So to teach carnivores about regenerative agriculture is a much better use of time and effort, in
Hmm.
my opinion, than trying to convert the masses, right? Because carnivores are already questioning things. I think the same thing goes along the lines of like Bitcoiners. They're already
Yep.
questioning, right? They're already saying this is not right. So I think that the ones that the demographics that are more open to it, it's about strengthening that why, and not preaching to it, not shoving it down their throat, just being a service through entrepreneurship. That's whether that's the computer stuff you're working on, it's phenomenal. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Or the farmers getting better at the logistics or the processing, like what Jake Wolke's doing.
Hmm.
That kind of thing is what will move the needle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's kind of been my mission is like, yeah, I kind of gave up on trying to orange pill or health pill the average person, right? It's not going to happen like until it needs to happen. So, but if you take a Bitcoiner who's like maybe they're already cutting out seed oils and it's like, all right, well, let me show you about this and this. And again, it's like subtle nudges I think is important, but like you said, like fostering an environment for entrepreneurship and getting that message out there, like getting everyone in the health space to like accept Bitcoin for payment, or getting regenerative farmers to accept Bitcoin, and that's been a successful relationship, or at least in some capacity. And yeah, I think that's a great point, and we just have to see, I think, as well, like what Wolke's doing in Australia, okay, or like what Max might be doing down there. Like, can we emulate that sort of success here? Like, what are they doing? And being collaborative on a scale internationally. And then yeah, same thing, if you have an event in Arkansas that's really successful, oh, maybe I could do something similar here in Wyoming. I think that's a good way to just collaborate and, like you said, kind of touch the right people that are ripe for the conversion and ripe for the opening of their horizons.
Yeah. But one more thing on that is that we're talking about the message, right? The message that we're all preaching or living or very passionate about. The thing to always remember, and it's I won't say names on this one, but it was after an interview. My producer was just shaking his head, and I'm like, "What?" He's like, "The messenger is as important as the message." And that is something that's really stuck with me. And if we want to reach somebody, it goes back to everything we were talking about with the Dale Carnegie stuff. You treat them right. You build a relationship where there's trust and stuff, and you don't just like crow hop them. It's never going to change anybody.
Yeah, well, that's why I think we need to be a conduit for like Uncle Jack's message, because there's him and a few other people. Oh yeah, it's just like the reality of it, right? And you know, not everyone is gonna be like that person, but the information wherever the source is, like that's invaluable, and that's why these
Absolutely.
podcast platforms are so great, because we can give kind of a nice, unpolarized way for people to communicate, and then we have that information and we can spread that word to, our audience. And that's why I just love the multidisciplinary approach to things, right?
Uh-huh.
Like when I found you and I found like Max, I was like, wow, like, because when we started Decentralized Radio, I was like, there's nobody who's talking about like both of these things. I mean, there's still, you guys aren't heavy on the Bitcoin front, but still, like, it's really impressive. And there's three of us, right? Like nobody else is talking. There's regenerative ag, there's farming podcasts, there's plenty of health podcasts, there's plenty of Bitcoin podcasts, but there's not a lot of people doing multiple disciplines. And this is something I've prided myself on my whole life, is being well-rounded. And I
Yeah.
just think in 2024, this is the most important thing, right? Like, and you realize that as a father, as someone who's homeschooling, like how important is it for you to be well-rounded?
So important, and I don't. That's kind of why I started this whole conversation with giving that little small town. Grew up, saw the demise of it in the real estate, petroleum technology, EMS. And and I grew up with one grandpa was raising broiler chickens for Tyson. So I grew up in that world too, and we roofed. So we, did construction. So being well-rounded, even in these, the jobs is so important too, because it exposes you to such different degrees of life. And so being well-rounded, I used to, I've gone back and forth, jack of all trades, master of none. Like I used to, I don't know how I fully feel about that. Almost it's an insult, but on the other hand, it's like you've got to be balanced. So there's, I think if you're well-rounded in topics that are complementary and they improve your life, it's extremely important. But being a like I used to be, being able to know the roster of every football team in the NFL, and then I knew the sticker price of every stock on Nasdaq. Like that's irrelevant. It doesn't freaking matter, right? But like understanding how the body works and how to make money and provide for your family. So to ramble a little bit, it's like just the stuff that matters. You need to be really, really well rounded.
Yeah, and that's what I said earlier, right? Like health and wealth and food, it's a great place to start, and learning about your environment. But I agree, and that quote, like the jack of all trades, master of none. I'm pretty sure that the second half of that is still like, it's often better than a master of one, right? So it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
because I remember someone saying that to me, and I was like, yeah, but like especially in 2024, like you can't outsource the quality of any service now. Like you need to be on top of your shit, and that's like the
yeah,
byproduct of a fiat economy. I think it'd be nice if I could just trust someone to be in charge of my finances, for example. But nobody could ever be more knowledgeable about your own health than you. I mean, it's your
right.
body. Like how could you ever outsource that? So I agree. I mean, like if you're gonna get passionate and crazy and learn about some stuff, like at least make it like high ROI to your life. Like
Yeah.
these are really, really important. But maybe last little thing here, Sowing Prosperity, you guys have put out some great podcasts, but now are doing, you made a documentary with Will. What is the goal for your channel, and what do you got cooking for 2024? What's the vision for Sowing Prosperity, and what are your big things that you're working on this year, so people can get excited about it and check you guys out?
Yeah, I really want to just keep hammering in with incredible guests, just sharing the knowledge, and then I want to continue to, as we apply, be able to, package the information to where it's easier. So, I've got to, I'm way past due writing my second edition to the book, but so Father's Heart was the first book, but man, I've learned so much, and I've been so hesitant about revising it yet, because the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't understand it all, and then how much you would change going back. So it's like, and just every day, it's like, well, I was just not ready. So just continue to create life altering, life improving content, and just help people. But I seriously think that the entrepreneurial side is how we expand this to just become more decentralized and stuff. So looking at you're really kind of ramping up that Sowing Prosperity Institute on the entrepreneur side. It's I think that's what pays dividends for the long term.
I love it. How do you balance learning and creating? Because this is a challenge for me. You have all these books behind you. You clearly do your homework on guests, but it's tough to fit it into the schedule. And I've been trying to be more deliberate about, reading X amount and per day or research papers. So how do you do it? Do you have a system, or do you kind of block off time, or what's your
Yeah, Tristan, I think the most important thing is mentors for whatever it is you're trying to learn. So if it is how do I become more effective, get an effective coach, right? Whatever context that means. John Lee Dumas was pretty instrumental early on in my self education, right? So Entrepreneurs on Fire is his podcast. He's definitely one of the OGs in that space. But I learned a lot of lessons from JLD, and he was actually one of my very first podcast guests years ago. And just finding somebody that is where you want to be in whatever, if it's jujitsu, if it's Bitcoin, if it's farming, just getting somebody as a mentor that can speed up that learning process. So the way I do it is it in batches. It's in batches of how do you get this problem solved, bring in somebody to coach you through it, apply it, hopefully it sticks, then teach it to somebody else. That's where the magic happens, I think, is teaching.
Oh yeah, that's so true. Like I think that's such a great point is once you can formulate it in your head, and again there's different levels, listening to something versus reading something on a screen versus writing it down, and then teaching is like the culmination of all that, and that really resonates in your mind when you do that. I've certainly realized that, but it's the mentorship as well. That's great. That's a good point. It's challenging for me sometimes because I feel like I'm reading, I need Robert Becker to come back to life to like ask him questions, but there's some folks out there, right, that there's always someone out there that has a vast amount of knowledge to tap into, and you just got to find them. And that's the fun part about the podcast is we can go on like these Easter egg hunts to find, especially the researchers, like they don't have big social media followings, but there's so many people to talk to. It's really so exciting. Yeah. So if people don't already know, where can they find everything that you're doing and everything that you have done, like your book, for example?
Yeah, so I own the little farmers market that I own with my mother is my business partner is Me and McGee Market, and that's just North Little Rock. So that's kind of what really launched it. So North Little Rock, Arkansas, right here in the middle. The Facebook's kind of the primary means at which I use there, but Sowing Prosperity, and then Logan Duvall. That's the book, Father's Heart. It's a little dated now for sure, but the podcast is on all the platforms. YouTube has done pretty solid. So yeah, it's man, just continue to learn and just help others.
Appreciate you so much, Logan. It's been a pleasure, and we'll definitely stay in touch and hopefully connect in person one day. That'd be fun.
Absolutely, brother.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.